Good morning, friends. I just dropped my kids off and I am loving this weather. It is 67. Absolutely perfect weather. Not too hot, not too cool. Shorts on, short sleeves, cool weather. You know, in Texas, we get like 10 perfect days a year. It's not that many. It's not enough. I was spoiled living in California. I tell people all the time, like, California, you know, you can hate on it all you want. There's a whole mess going on there. The government is all out of whack. The policies they institute are just stupid. And they have no idea what they're doing over there. They have no idea how to run a state. But the weather. That's why people stay, man. California's a great place to be poor because the welfare system is very generous, which makes it terrible on pretty much everybody else because, taxes and everything. But you can just, even if you work a crappy job in California, there's so much to do because the outdoors is just gorgeous. So that's why I know people stay there. When I was at school and all these international students were there, they're like, we don't get California. Why does everybody love it? Blah, blah, blah. And then after about 6 months of school, they were like, oh, we get it now. Because every day, like almost every day is amazing. So anyways, that was a side note. I was thinking today, I had a couple things I thought about talking about that's just I'm processing right now. But the number one thing I'm processing is just like a ceiling over a place or over a person. We like, what does it take to break that? What does it take to break a ceiling over you? If you keep coming up against a limit, what is that limit? Whether it's financially, relationally, in influence, whatever it is, it's possible to hit a ceiling on something. And in my life, in my experience, sometimes those ceilings, they take work to break, but more often than not, I'm finding they're self-imposed, even though we don't understand it. I have a lot of friends and family in my life who just amazing people. Like you cannot. I've been so blessed in my life to just have the most incredible people be a part of it, and one of the saddest things though in that is that in my life also, a lot of those amazing people, not all of them, not even most of them I'd say, but a lot of them have hit a place of major frustration in their life, and they're wondering why certain things won't change, won't grow for them, why and what's sad to me is that it's obvious in a lot of these cases. There's something they won't give up. Jesus says that whosoever leaves behind their family, their land, their wealth, he names a number of things. And he says whosoever leaves that will gain 100 times more in this lifetime, plus eternal life in the next, plus persecution, he says. And why does he say plus with persecution? Because when you're blessed, people don't like it. Just look at our America today. Look how, even though there are wealthy people who cheated their way to get there, who lied and were terrible, it's the minority. Most successful people have done things the right way. Even though there are, you name it, influential people who are just not great people, hurt most people in their path. It's the minority. Most people are good people. I saw this, I was watching America's Got Talent last night, which I love that show. It's so good. It's just so amazing to see what's out there in the world talent-wise. And Simon Cowell got a little segment where he's talking about why he loves America. He's British, and he said he always wanted to come to America, and names some of the reasons why. And then he talks about how since he's come to America, He says he's been to like nearly every big city in America because of the American Idol and America's Got Talent, traveling. And he said this thing that really stuck out to me. He said that every American he's met has been one of the nicest people he's ever met. Now, obviously, that's not completely true, because there are people who are not great people. And you know, for whatever reason, hurt, pain, they choose to be mean, whatever it is. But there are people who you meet and you're like, yikes. And but I love hearing foreigners' perspectives, because they bring in with something that we don't always get. We're the frogs in the boiling water, right? We don't notice everything that changes or how different we are, because we're already here. And to hear that from a foreigner is just amazing. And I know he's a showman and there's more reasons why he talks that way, but anybody who's watched those shows knows that Simon Cowell's a pretty honest guy. He just lets it, and that's why a lot of people hate him and others love him. And I don't think he was lying when he said that. I think he was exaggerating, but I don't think he was lying. And it just is another reminder that most people are good people. Most people want to be loving people. Most people want to be kind. Most people want to be that way. But having said that, despite we tend to think the worst, well, not all of us, but a lot of us tend to think the worst out of people who succeed. And when we do that, when we look down upon people who are successful, we limit ourselves. And that's one way we can limit ourselves, is because if we're not celebrating success, if we're not championing success, then we're putting ourselves in a box, and we're cursing ourselves, because God is not going to promote somebody who's not a champion of others. He won't. And so that's one thing that holds us back. Another thing, though, is like I said, this unwillingness to leave behind things. So Jesus says, so that's why persecution comes, because people don't like successful people, but it's usually because they're jealous or they're mad at themselves for not succeeding, and they take it out on others. But if I'm learning anything in life, it's that for myself, I'll just speak from my own life. I could have made more money so far in my life. I could have done a lot of things, and I realize I haven't, because of choices I've made. Now, I've chosen to give up most of everything. Other than my wife and kids, I've at some point left everything. I've left jobs. I've left my family, my parents. I left as soon as I got out of high school, I left. And I didn't leave them behind in a mean way. I just was like, my parents told me to dream and to spread my wings and fly, and so I did. And I came back for a time, and then I left again, and I've always left. I've always not been afraid to leave. But that's partly because my parents raised me to do that. They never put that guilt on me that I need to stay around or anything. They'd always say, wherever you go, we will come to you. You are the one, our kids, you guys have to live your life, have your children, have your families, find where it goes to you. And we're getting older. We'll be less tied to our jobs and family. We won't be tied to anything. So we will come to you. So you go wherever you need to go. And man, I tell you what, that was such freedom they gave me to do that. And I believe that's God's heart too. And so they communicated that to me, so I was free to go. I'm learning the older I get, that most people don't get that freedom from their families. Most people don't get that from those around them. And honestly, the more I've planted myself in communities, and then I feel like it's time to leave, I get that a lot. I get people doubting me or wondering why we're leaving or all this stuff. And not to say that every time I've left something it's been healthy, because there have been times I've not felt but I usually stick things out until I really know I gotta leave. And but there's others, and if you're not willing to leave behind everything except for your wife and kids, I'm not telling you to leave behind your wife and kids or your husband and kids. If you're not willing to leave everything else, though, I God can't unleash to you everything. He can't. Anything we put above his call for us is an idol. And the reason I say he's not gonna, you don't leave your wife and kids or your husband and kids, it's because your husband or your wife, you two are one. And so God is never going to separate that. It says, what God has put together, let man not separate. And God hates divorce. So God's never going to call a man to go do something that leaves his wife behind. You know, I mean, it might be like a trip or something, but I'm talking about in life, a calling. You're never going to leave your wife behind. A wife, you're never going to be called to leave your husband behind for promotion. I'm not talking about divorce when it's, you know, biblically acceptable or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who feel like they have to leave their husband or wife because they're holding them back. That's just not true. And so God, when he opens up doors, he'll open it up for both of you to grow, both of you to be promoted. And then children should just be obvious. Like, God doesn't abandon his children, nor would he ever call you to. But everything else, you know, and I'm not talking about grown children either. Because I know there's somebody out there who's going to throw the verse at me where it says, like, leave behind your children, whatever. That's talking about grown children. It's talking about don't tie yourself to, if your kids have a family, unless God has opened that door to you, God's not telling you to just stay with them forever because they always need you. No, they don't. They have God. So, all that to say, what is it in your life you just can't leave? Is there a parent you just feel like, oh, life's easier because my parents help me watch my kids and I can never leave that? Is that your line? Would you not leave your parents? Even though you're a grown-up, even though you have children, is that what your line is? Is it your job because you like your job, or you don't like your job but it provides for you? You have health insurance and a good salary, so you're unwilling to leave it because you're afraid of what it might look like without that job. Look, I can tell you, in America, I've lived with nothing. I've been dirt poor, and if you're a believer, God always provides. He does. It's through other people. It's through whatever. Like, it is miraculous. I tell stories for hours about how God's provided for us over the years when we went after something. And anyways, you never have to worry about that. What about friends? Do you have friends that you're so close to you just can't imagine leaving them behind? What is it? What is the thing that you put above God? Is it your hometown because you just love it and you are so comfortable and you're known there and you have influence there, and God's calling you to go somewhere else? Is it, you know, whatever it is, you know, but what is the one thing where you deep down have a no? Like, if God asked you to leave it, you know, like, you couldn't say yes. And here's the thing I want to say. Most of the time, being willing to say yes to leaving something means that God's still going to give it to you. There's been many times I felt like God asked me to give something up, and then as soon as I said yes, he didn't have me follow through on it. So sometimes he just wants to know we're willing. But what is it for you? What are you willing to leave? Nowadays, you know, people talk about stagnant wages, and some of that is true, definitely. But what I want to say to somebody who can't make a living where they live, it's like, are you willing to move? If you have skill sets, if you've grown, if you're a value to somebody, but that place you're at doesn't value you, are you willing to move? What are we willing to do to grow? You know, most of the time the ceiling is over our own heads. If you're stuck, it's because you're not moving. It's because there's something you won't leave behind. And I don't mean that in a harsh way. I just mean that as somebody who has lived a lot of experiences in this one area, and has totally learned that when I'm stuck, it's generally my fault. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I don't mean there's guilt and shame attached to that. I just mean it's usually because of choices I've made, and in fact almost always choices I've made. And owning those choices is important, and realizing that, like, hey, maybe the reason I'm not getting ahead in this, or maybe the reason I'm not seeing breakthrough in this, is because I actually am refusing to give up this. I'm refusing to change this. And so that's the big question is, are you willing to give everything? And God doesn't want you to live a destitute life. He doesn't want you to, he's not going to ask you to sacrifice everything without giving you more in return. He always gives more. Always more. It's always more blessed. I can tell you, I've left behind family, friends, jobs, and every single time I stepped into something new, it's been greater than what was before it. Even when I came to this small town I live in now, I did not want to come. I really didn't. And things did not turn out the way I expected. I ended up working a job I mostly didn't like. I had to stay there for 3 years. I just couldn't find anything else. And now looking back, I can see why God had me there. But I actually quit 3 different times and kept getting sucked back in. That's when you know that God has put that ceiling on you. But that job provided for us, and it actually opened up doors later. It ended up being a blessing in the long scheme of things. You know, we get so narrow-minded on just what's tomorrow, what this year, when God's thinking our whole life. He's planning our whole life. And so what's 3 years in a life, you know? We'll do it for college, but would we do it for a season of planting in an area, you know? But what we found here in Kerrville is the best community we ever had. And we had good communities before. In the 2 other places I've lived with my wife before this, that we moved to right after getting married, like, we had good communities. But it's been better here. Everything's been up. My income's gone up here. My influence has grown here. You name it, and it's been an improvement. My family's grown. I went from 3 kids when we moved here to now I have 6. It's just, everything has grown. And now we're on the precipice of another major transition. In 5 months, we're moving to Austin, which, big city, because we've hit a ceiling here in Kerrville. And that's okay. That ceiling's not the same for everybody. There's some people who would thrive here. It's not us. Like, we've hit a ceiling. We've gone as far as we can go. And God's made that clear to us, so we're moving. But if we had hunkered down and we said, no, absolutely not, we're going to stay here, by the nature of my business I'm in right now, by the nature of what we're trying to do with our lives, my wife and I, and the nature of what we feel God wants to do with us, we would put a ceiling over ourselves, and we would not be past it. And no amount of prayer, no amount of fasting, no amount of work, no amount of hustle, no matter any of that stuff, you can't break a ceiling over yourself once the time is to move on. You can't. It's not God imposed. It's God saying, like, I need to move you to the next place. Jesus was always on the move. The disciples, the apostles, always on the move. And it doesn't mean like you won't. Maybe some people are called to plant for 20, 30, 50 years. Some people are in some areas. So far, my wife and I, we've not found that place for us. Now, we're young. It could happen. The next place could happen. The next place after that, I don't know. But what I do know is this, is our willingness to move has accelerated our growth. Our willingness to go has changed things for us. And that it's just the willingness. It's not like we didn't make major moves on a whim. We've always sought the Lord's guidance. We've always sought confirmation, everything. And we don't go until we're sure. But we don't just go in an emotional outburst. But the deal is, like, we've been willing. And so we've seen immense growth in our lives because we've been willing to leave. And I got to say that the people I've met who are unwilling to leave usually are stuck. Not always. Sometimes it's because they're meant to be planted. But most of the time, they're stuck and they're frustrated. But there's something they're holding on to that they can't move past. And it's put a ceiling over them, and it's a self-imposed ceiling. Because God's asking them to leave it, and they won't. And that's sad. And it doesn't mean they're not saved. It doesn't mean they can't still live a mostly blessed life. But it does mean that the things that are deepest in their heart and the things that are deepest in God's heart for them cannot be realized because unwillingness to leave. So, are you willing to leave? Would you be willing to go anywhere for God? Would you be willing to leave everything for Him? Other than wife or husband and kids, obviously, other than your direct family. But would you be willing? And I'll say, I want to jump back on that one more time before I go. I've never met somebody who could legitimately tell me, God ask them to leave their family, their wife and kids. I've had people tell me that God told them to do that, but I knew it wasn't legitimate because their life was a shambles. And they were miserable, and they left a wake of destruction behind them. That's not God's plan. And so anybody who's ever told me that God told them to leave their wife because they were holding them back, or God told them to leave their husband because he was holding them back, or God told them to leave their kids behind. I'm not talking grown kids. I'm talking kids they were raising. Anytime I've met somebody who said that God told them to do that, I knew right then it was a lie, because God won't tell you to do that. He just won't. But everything else is on the table. It's on the table for you to leave. So will God, like, are you stuck? Maybe it's time to start asking God that question, like, what have I put in front of him? What have I made more important than him? And he's got grace for you. He's merciful. He will meet you in gentleness. He'll gently remind you. He will give you the courage to face that fear. But he will bring it up because he wants you to be whole, and he wants the most for you. And most of the time, find the most means leaving. I can't tell you how many times I've met people who, when they finally were ready to leave, that's when they found their fulfillment. Their heart came to life. So ask yourself that question today if you're stuck. And even ask it if it's not stuck. I ask myself it regularly. What in my life right now is impeding me from going forward? And it's a good exercise. And I think you'd be amazed at the results you get when you actually start facing that stuff and making those hard choices. And maybe you'll find God's not asking you to leave anything right now, and that's okay too. But if that is the case, you will be happy where you're at. You'll be fulfilled, and you'll know why you're doing what you're doing. So anyways, God bless you guys. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.